before we get started, I also wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered here today and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to extend that respect to any Indigenous Australians that are here with us as well. A few little safety tips before we get started. I know that I'm sure everyone is well aware that we're going to be walking along the beach, so just be careful. We don't want any trips and falls. We've got low tide at the moment, so it's a little bit squishy in places, and obviously cold as well if you get your feet in the water. Also be careful when we're picking up any of the shells that might be sharp. You might be lucky enough to find a blue ring octopus. It's probably very unlikely, but of course they are venomous. It actually takes a lot for them to be able to bite somebody. They have to be really, really threatened. There's only 2 people in Australia that have ever died from a blue ring octopus bite, but yes, please be careful. If anyone needs to disappear to the bathrooms, they're just over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to first head through over here into the gardens. We're going to have a look at some of our native plants, particularly those that are edible and have some medicinal properties, and learn about some of the Indigenous history. Then we'll make our way through here onto the beach, learning about some of the dunes and the different ecosystems down here, and some of our marine life, some of our shells and different species that we're going to be able to find. And then we're going to carry on through here, and John's going to take you through there and have a look at our beautiful limestone cliffs. Oh, yes. On your little handout here, the more people that we have looking for things, the better. So if you find things on here or anything else of interest, please yell out and let us know. All right. Okay. So the area that we're going to walk into now is known as a place for secret women's business. So it was an area where our Boonwurrung people, our Boonwurrung women, would go and they would dance. It was a special birthing place. They would pass down secret advice from one generation to the next, and this whole area is filled with really amazing plants that they were used, some of them that were medicinal. And so we're going to have a look through there as we walk. This one here is bower spinach, for anyone that doesn't know. So that's a really, really tasty leaf that you can have in different salads. You can cook it, basically anything that you can do with spinach. So I don't know if any dogs have walked past and done anything on them. So if you choose one, then choose one from higher up if you want to taste it. We also here have our coastal banksia, if I can find one on the ground. So these have a nectar in the morning. I was trying to find a loose one, but I'll just take a nectar in the morning. And the girls used to use these to brush their hair. So they're actually, they can really get through your hair. They would also be put into like a little bag with water to make cordial. And if you left it there long enough and add a couple of other little ingredients, it would also make alcohol. So, so they might disappear by the end of the walk. So, all right, we'll keep making our way through. Just making sure everyone's nice and close. So this one down here is known as pig face, which some of you, I'm sure everyone's probably seen this while they've been around the area. And it has 3 uses. First, if you were really dehydrated and really thirsty, you could chew it up and get the moisture. The leaves are also fibre as well. So very tasty. And when it normally has a flower, which we don't have at the moment, there's like a little fruit underneath which tastes like a fig. Some people say it tastes like strawberry or watermelon. And this was actually used very similar to aloe. So if anyone has aloe plants at home that you'd normally put on burns and stings and bites, this is very similar on the inside. And so you can use it for that. They also used to chew up the liquid and use it as like a throat wash if you had a sore throat or a bacterial infection as well. So, but it's quite salty though, not particularly tasty. All right, let's walk through here. All right, so we'll keep going in the, I know if everyone can, hopefully everyone can hear me. Some of you might be aware that it was around 65,000 years ago that our first Indigenous Australians came here. Thank you. And so we actually have 5 different tribes, as you can see, and they're within the Boonwurrung clans. There are 6. So here in particular, it was called Ngarak Willem, are the people that lived around the Mordialloc area, and they were known as the stone people. So they would make houses out of stones. So European settlers got here in 1835, and 42 years later, the last full-blooded Indigenous man, known as Jimmy Dunbar, had passed away, which is incredibly, incredibly sad. I have a picture. This is Jimmy. So his wife Nancy actually passed away only a couple of days earlier. He was taken to the Alfred Hospital, and his 12 dogs followed him there. So I don't know if you can see that very well. So they followed him all the way from here to the Alfred Hospital, and they sat there for 2 days mourning him before making their way back here. And then they would go to all of Jimmy's usual places that he liked to be. But we've lost a lot of our Indigenous history, which is incredibly sad. The people here, so if you imagine that Mordialloc Creek was beautiful, filled with fish, every March the eels would come down. I think some of you might still remember when there were still lots of eels in the creek, and they would have gatherings there. So the Boonwurrung people would go, and that's where they would meet, and they would have big parties, and that's where people could choose a wife, because it was really important that our different tribes didn't interbreed. So they would have big gatherings there. What else was I going to tell you? In terms of, this is the picture of us, of our first Boonwurrung people coming down. So back then it was just at the end of the last ice age when they arrived. So they would have come down by canoes and on foot, which would have been an incredibly long journey. The primary food that they would have eaten here were called yam daisies. Has anyone heard of a yam daisy before? A few? So when the European settlers came, they were almost completely wiped out. So now they're critically endangered because the European settlers brought a particular type of animal and that was different to our native animals. Does anyone know what was different about the animals that the Europeans brought? Something to do with their feet. Yeah, they had hooves, and so all of that, they would trample all the yam daisies, which was incredibly sad. So, as well as that, we were talking about secret women's business before. There is a plant just over here called hopgoodinnia, where you can see these little yellow flowers. And the women used to use this because it has a natural sedative. So if they had really fussy teething babies, they would get some of these plants and they would rub it on the gums of the babies to take away that pain. And if they were crying and they were disturbing everyone, they would actually put some of it in the fire and hold the babies over the smoke, and it would put them to sleep. So probably shouldn't tell everyone that. that plant might disappear. But what we, it was not just the food that our Indigenous people had lost as we came here, but also Europeans brought lots of different diseases, and they had no resilience or immunity to those diseases. So there were lots of atrocious things that happened to our First Nations people, both some being deliberate, some being more unconscious that happened. But where Mordialloc Creek was a boundary. So all of this was swampland, and it was all drained. All the fish were taken out of all of those swamps, and it was used as food. And then one of the other most interesting stories that we know, which again, some of you may have heard if you know Ray Lewis. He would have told you this story probably many times. But the bay here, so Port Phillip Bay, I probably don't, where's Claire gone with my other pictures, I think. Oh, no, they're over there.
Oh, there?
That's okay. I just wanted this one. I want to show you. So yeah, about 22,000 years ago, this whole area was land. So it was a terrestrial plain, and there was just this one little lake called Lake Phillip was the the European name. Which was right at the head. So the head's completely silted up, and they created a 120-metre waterfall tumbling to the bottom. Right? And so all of our Indigenous people were living here on this area. I think there is another picture somewhere, maybe in your hands, and help you to imagine what it would have been like. They would have had a lot of our megafauna. We would have had lots of emus and kangaroos and wombats and all sorts of things over that entire time period. And then what happened is that all of that water started to evaporate, and the rivers were not filling it at the rate that it was evaporating. So eventually it had all dried up. But then what happened is about 800 years ago, so really recent in relative history, it actually blocked again. So all this silt and clay ran down through the rivers and blocked up the heads once again. And so again, the Indigenous people were living on that land. And in one day, imagine like a dam, and the dam cracks. And so the water from all the ocean waters entered Port Phillip Bay at such an astonishing rate that it wiped out everything in its path. All the trees, all the people that were living there, and all the animals, of course. And now that we have even better technology, you can still see all these river systems and as you fly over Port Phillip Bay, which is really interesting. All right, so let's make our way down to the beach. Hello. 800 years ago was the last time that it happened, which was around the last mini ice age. That's a yeah, so geology records and through our Indigenous oral history, but it's not well documented. The one that was 800 years ago is not particularly well documented. All right, so just for those that don't know as well, that Marines Point. So this is a marine sanctuary. So it was made a marine sanctuary in 2012, and it was after a 16-year fight of local school teacher Bob Whiteway, who was an incredible member of our community, and he, like many other members of our local community, understood how important this area is. So what that means for it to be a marine protected area, so this area is about 3.2 kilometres wide, and it's about 500 metres out to sea, and it means it's a no-take zone. So there can't be any killing, no spearfishing, no fishing, and we've got to be really careful of the ecosystems that are here. So this is a place where it's also known as a marine nursery, if you like. So we have special ecosystems, particularly out here over our seagrass, where all of these animals, when they're born, they use that seagrass for protection. So you find lots of little crustaceans, lots of little baby fish. So for those of you that go snorkeling or diving around here, you might have seen them. And so that seagrass is incredibly important. We also here, as you can see, it's low tide, so you can see our rocky reef system here, which is also incredibly important for lots of animals to be able to hide in. So we're going to go and have a closer look at these areas. Behind you as well is some coastal salt bush. So this tree here used to be ground up and used as salt in cooking. So dried out and ground out. Somewhere there'll be some seaberry salt bush as well that has some very sweet little red berries that you might find. And the other one that I didn't see as we looked in there, we were trying to look for one. I don't know if anyone saw it. Did you see the kangaroo? The kangaroo apple's really interesting because the leaves actually change shape depending on the season, which is why it's hard to sometimes find them. But at a certain time of year, it looks just like a kangaroo paw. So if you're down here, have a look for it. It is when anything that is green on that plant is incredibly toxic. So do not eat anything that's green, and it can cause paralysis, like really yucky gastrointestinal upset, very nasty. However, The reason why it's in that area is because when those berries turn to yellow, they were used by women for secret women's business as a form of contraception. And when they turn orange to red, they're very tasty. Well, it depends on who you ask. Apparently they taste like anywhere from melon to pumpkin, but they're also high in vitamin C and antioxidants and things like that as well. All right, so we're going to have a look and we can spread out a little bit as we go down onto the beach. This one is Neptune's necklace and it's full of iodine. So apparently if you dry these out a little bit, it's got a really nutty taste. And when they've had periods in time where, particularly there was an area in New South Wales where they used to feed it to the children one a day to help with iodine. So what else can we find? So wiggly lines, we're looking for some wiggly lines in the sand to find some of our, yeah, we're going to find our snails. You found one? So normally, there's probably something in here. I can feel it. What is that? That's a little snail that's in there. Can you see him? Little tiny snail. Yeah. And then, yep. We also, I've got some different things in here as well. So, sponges. Amazing fact about sponges is that, so they often have like a big hole in the middle where they're sucking in well, they've got all their little tiny pores where they're sucking in all of that water, getting out all the nutrients and then spitting out the hole in the middle. But if you have a live sponge and you put that in a blender, which is a horrible thing to do and you shouldn't do it, but if you were to put it into a blender and it's separated into all of its pieces, if you left it there overnight, it would join itself back together. And if you put two sponges that are both alive in that blender, they will do the same thing and they will go back to both of their, without mixed up pieces, they will go back into their original shape again. Incredible, isn't it? So all of these animals have these different superpowers. And if we can find, I've probably got an example here, but where I've got a turban shell and you can see that these little holes. I'm sure everyone's found a shell before with little holes. And so what that is that we've got two different types of these different gastropods. So we've got gastropods, we've got bivalves, which are things like our mussels, which we'll probably find later. But these ones, you normally find that if it's a herbivore, then it's got a larger opening so that it can get through and soak up as much algae and food. But if it's a carnivore, it has what's called a radula. And a radula is like its tongue, but imagine it's covered in all these little teeth. And what they do is they drill into the shell and then suck out the soft body of normally these little herbivores. So that is why they have all these little holes in them. So now those are normally, and of course then what the children would do here as our First Nations children of the Boon Wurrung people, they would gather all of those and make necklaces and jewellery, which still happens today for many people. What else have we got in here? Yeah, so you'll find, so where you find these little tiny wiggly lines, that one's not joined, but normally at the end, if it's, that one's probably not that, oh, there you go, you can see. So at the end of that wiggly line, what'll happen, you can't see that very well, but there's a little snail in there. But that was only a little tiny line, so it's only a little tiny snail. And then we can put him back. So a lot of it is, yeah, because of pollution or the runoff as the coast has all been developed, all of that runoff has just gone through. But there used to be, so do you know Davies Bay? No. So just past Frankston, Davies Bay, there used to be all of these mussels, like that whole area used to be covered. And I was away for 7 months overseas. I came back and gone, like the whole place was, they'd all just been fished, and you always see boats coming there and taking them. And so, yeah. That in Davies Bay there used to be like this big rock, which was, and that there's this shellfish reef there full of mussels, and now, yeah, it's completely disappeared. So I think it was just overfished. It could have been a combination of things, some of that runoff that's gone into the bay, but So, what else have you found on your things? Have you found anything? You gotta have a good look. Yeah. 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 Whoop, yep, don't walk in the water. Careful of the water here. Ah. Yeah, normally we see there's a lot of the sea lettuce that you see around here as well. There's some of the seaweed and kelp. And they actually used to use seaweed to be able to tell what the weather was doing. So once it dries out, then it goes that sort of blacky brown colour. Actually, if you put it back into the water, it will regenerate as well. So when they used to hang it up in front of the houses, they could tell if the weather was going to change because of the humidity in the air, and the seaweed would change colour. So, yeah. Yeah, there's lots of amazing facts. So I mean, we've got beautiful dunes here. And you know, the problem that we have now is as everything is being developed, we have that dune area is receding more and more. And so we get a lot of invasive species and seeds that come through the water systems, obviously through the wind from people's gardens and things like that. In southern Australia, it was probably about 60% native in most of southern Australia, but actually along the Morning Peninsula, 95% of plants here along those dune systems have been introduced. So, which of course means that we have this as breeding habitat for a lot of the seabirds that you'll see, for things like our little penguins, where we used to have, you know, way more penguins around, but unfortunately we've killed off all of their habitat. But the gulls will use it, pelicans, lots of crustaceans and lizards and all sorts of things. So it's really, really important that when you're you know, if you do any replanting programs, you actually have to be really careful about what species that you're choosing. And because it has a layering system, so it's really easy to see here that coastal salt bush is taking all of that salt out of the sand and out of the soil, because that means that then the next layer can grow because it's not as salty, because most plants don't have that ability to absorb so much salt. And then each one of those plants has a different function. So they're either putting nitrogen back into the soil or or whatever that other particular tree might need. But of course that whole ecosystem has been a little bit upset now.
Let's move on now for John.
Yeah, lovely.
John's going to take us a little further to the south.